Guys, intro time.
Wait, which intro?
The wisdom check.
Oh, good.
Wait, no. I thought we were keeping the old intro. What's wrong with the old one? People like that one.
It was too long.
Yeah.
Too many fucking gifs.
Yeah.
Yeah. But can we keep the part where I yell more?
No.
But it's the intro to end all intros.
I got like what? 2 lines last time?
Do you want more lines, Tim?
Well, no, not really.
In a world without answers.
Yeah.
Wait, do you want to start with that?
Here we go. Exactly like last time.
Wait, okay, so we're doing it the exact same way? Let's start with Smoky Bar.
No. It's a new season. We have to have a new intro.
More.
Not sure why we thought this would go any differently.
Oh, well. Welcome, everyone, to the Wisdom Check, where Jeff and Dustin welcome a guest every week to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Welcome.
This is ridiculous. I'm starting the stream now.
Wait, where's my die at? Well, we can't start until I botch, and it's not an intro unless I'm botching.
You're on.
Here we go.
Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Monday night here at the Wisdom Check. I am Dustin, and with me, as always, is Jeff. And tonight we'll be finishing up we kind of took like a month-long time period there, a series of Mondays, if you will, where we were going to take time to talk about some various TTRPG topics with just me and Jeff. This is how we kind of started the show out. We've had a bunch of fantastic guests, and God, we've had so many great guests on the show over the course of time. But we wanted to kind of get back to a point where me and you got to talk a little more about things that were more like things you might actually be doing in your TTRPG as opposed to products coming out, things of that nature. Now, obviously, we do have guests coming up over the next few weeks after this. And so we're going to be getting back into talking about a lot of what's going on. Yeah, no Everstorm spoilers still, apparently. Come on, Air Laser, get caught up. It's only been like 3 weeks. Caught up. It's like, you got to treat Everstorm like Game of Thrones. You got to watch that crap immediately or you're going to get a ruin. But anyways, we are back. And tonight, I think we're going to talk a little bit about some pacing, some plot structuring, and how we're going to... and how you just go about creating your actual plot hooks and setting up intrigue and stuff for your TTRPG storyline if you're a GM. Probably more on the GM side of things tonight than the player side, but we might hit a little bit on what you can do as a player as well to help with those sorts of things.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how this plays out. And actually, there they go. I was going to say my captioning didn't seem to be working. But yeah, we've been thinking a little bit about this topic. There's obviously a lot that goes into plots, coming up with things as a DM or GM, and it's a big part of the gaming experience, and it's a lot of work. And as somebody working on a current campaign, and as Dustin is doing the same, I imagine we have both been kind of staring down this barrel quite a bit and trying to come up with things that make sense. So, for me, what I've always found is I have a much easier time working on scenes than I do on plots. And I think that's something we discovered when we were doing like LARP stuff. And I think it has a lot to do with this concept of trying to figure out just how to line things up, how to pace them out, how to, grab your players where they are, and that kind of stuff, like figure out what they're interested in. And so it'll be interesting to see. I know we've talked a little bit about Air Laser. Yeah, oops. I did accidentally blurt that one out, didn't I?
Yeah, you might have.
But I think the whole internet was talking about it at a certain point, so sorry about that. But yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting topic because, we've been talking about our games. We've been talking about media that we consume on a daily basis, and I've been watching a lot of stuff recently that I think is going to be inspirational towards what I want to do. But translating what they're doing into what I want to do is going to be the challenge. So that'll be an interesting conversation.
That's always hard. So do you do that a lot, though, where you find inspiration from TV or film that leads you to something that you decide you want to do?
Well, yeah, I think it's a little column A, column B from like inspiration, but also I seem to gravitate towards certain things when I'm in a certain creative mode. So like, since I started working on this particular game, I knew I wanted to get into kind of conspiratorial, kind of gritty, kind of street level, something a little bit strange, something a little off-putting kind of vibe. And I found myself watching a lot of stuff like Mr. Robot that I hadn't seen until this week, or
Mr. Robot's so good.
I just started watching. I'm in season 2 right now.
I watched season 1. Season 2 lost me, but season 1 of Mr. Robot was so good. Yeah, Mr. Robot was so good. I enjoyed season 1.
So I'm watching a little bit of that. I'm watching. I just started today, earlier this morning actually. Man in the High Tower, and then I watched The Boys, and so. All of these things
combined. The Boys. I've been bad. I haven't watched it yet. I need to watch The Boys. I'm so mad at myself for having not seen it yet.
Yeah, you will. I think you'll be a fan like I am. Like I just watched all of The Boys yesterday from start to finish. So
yeah, I need to. It's on my list of shit to do when I get time. So
yes, and so it's got me in a bit of a gaming mood. We'll say it's there's a very dark cynicism that runs through all three that I think is quite delicious.
And I saw Levi saying he stands by. I saw some of your conversation in Discord, so it was already on my list of things I wanted to watch. So I need to just buckle down and do so.
But so it's apparently on Amazon is where I found it all. So
yeah,
that was a place I didn't know I could find, and there it was. But yeah, after watching some of that, there's a lot of things in it, like scenes that occur, kind of like the way that the story is unpacked, and just kind of like the feel, like the overall theme that's running through them all, that I feel is really good for the setting I'm trying to create. Now, whether or not I can create that, that's another story,
Well, because here's what happens, and you know this, and I know this. I'm not saying it's easy to write a TV show, not by any stretch of the imagination. People who have the job of being writers for those shows have their work cut out for them. But they have total control over what happens on that screen.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who's GMing a game does not have total control over anything the moment they sit down at the table. You can't make that level of intrigue just happen. Like, you have to get player buy-in to want that intrigue to be there.
Yes.
So this being the case, we got season 2 of Umbrella Academy also out. Like, you're seeing this on the screen, and it's easy because the writers group that put that episode or two together, the whole thing has been plotted out from beginning to end. It's an entire script that's been put together, so everything's laid out. So the difficulty comes when the players, of course, sit down at the table and ruin all your GM plans.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And so, it's another one of those things we talk about a lot around on the show is that, what you as a GM want isn't necessarily what a player wants. And there's oftentimes kind of some give and take that has to take place. So that's going to be a big part of it. Everyone's making fun of me for not knowing about Amazon stuff. Yes, well, take that. Thank you very much. I don't know. I got the notifications like 1,000 times from Amazon being like, "Hey, you've got unused things on your Amazon Prime services you haven't done. Have you tried this video or music service?" And I'm like, skip. Well, apparently there's some good stuff on there. I didn't realize. So.
Yeah, I was just making a joking comment. Levi said, "Don't put your big bad in guy on the screen with the players," and I'm like, I have put him in every session of Horror Huttenberg, and so far, the parties decide to kind of half work with him. Now they decide they hate him. So,
well, the trick is it depends on your system, right? I think Horton
makes a big difference.
Horton Huttenberg, it's pretty scary to deal with anybody. It could be like dude on the street with a pencil. And you'd be like, I don't know if I want to mess with that guy.
System makes a big difference. It really does. Because when it's a dangerous system, like everyone's like, oh, well, yeah, it is a scary thing.
Yeah, and if you do have a Clint in your party, yes, which Dustin doesn't have to deal with, but I will. Right. Even his non-combat characters will somehow destroy an NPC the moment you introduce him.
That's one of the things about Zweihander, though. You don't make your PC. You roll at random. So
wouldn't matter.
That's it.
Wouldn't matter. Just a D20 away.
There's no D20s in Zweihander either. So
I know. Don't worry. It's a dice system. He would roll. It would be double, critical success every single roll. It'd be like an 11 or something.
The funny part about it is that at any point in time, anybody can technically pull a Clint. because anyone in Zweihander
Theoretically.
can make a roll and it can just spend a few fortune and boom, like the NPC be dead. So I mean, anybody technically could do it. It's just nobody does. I think. But my point is that the reason why I've been successful in this, and if you want to talk a little about like how I like plot structure, is I gave everyone a reason to possibly like when I guess what I do with my big bad end guys is I kind of like disguise them as the NPC buddy. That is a concept that we kind of talk about. Like I kind of throw them in there and I try to layer enough intrigue and mystique and things going on and hide the plot, his plot, by, putting up there the basic plot. And then by the time you get to his plot, you're like, oh man, like we working for this guy and like he had this thing that sounded good and now maybe it's not so good. And now we just realize how bad it is. And so it's almost like layering the onion out till you realize he's the big bad end guy and not making it maybe quite so obvious from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, that's one approach. That's kind of a tried and true methodology, I think, is having the big bad guy not be the obvious initial villain. Because I think that's, usually there's the henchman that you deal with first, and then you kind of come into the actual real story, and the world expands at a certain point in the plot. And I think it's a pretty good tactic. I think for my purposes, I'm going to have to be worrying more about what the characters' buy-in to the world is.
Right.
And then from there, that will create the rest of the plot. Whereas I think in more traditional structuring, like you're either a monster of the week or your good guys fighting the bad guy, kind of vibe, there's a more clear delineation of like, this is the plot. Here's where it goes. Here's where you meet these people. Here's where you're introduced to these XYZ. Here's where you go from there. And I think you and I are both doing kind of a atypical structure, from a traditional adventure.
Yeah, I think that because, and this is where I have such a problem when I'm writing my modules for the Zweihander community, as I go back and I'm trying to rewrite Terra and Treefell right now, is that I have to cut my players back out of it.
Yeah.
But so much of what I do is based around the player decisions. So as I was joking with you before, I have like 8 different endings for Horror and Huttenberg written. And you're like, well, Dustin, how do you have 8 different endings written? I said, well, because I took into account all the different NPCs they may decide is the NPC they want to work with and decided what the end game for that NPC looks like. So when I say that I had one in mind who was kind of the big bad for the story, but if you decide to work with him, there's 4 others who can become the big bad of the story because they all have something that's not cool that they may or may not decide to do. And then I kind of reskin them based on my favorite 80s franchises. So
okay.
As I was joking, those who watched yesterday's episode of Horror and Huttenberg probably caught on that Alexi Arkwright is the Doc Brown from Back to the Future.
Yeah, I didn't pick that up from any of the numbers you were spouting.
From any of the numbers that were spouted out. So he's working on a time machine. You know how much I love time travel plots.
I honestly, when I saw any of that dropped in, I was like, wait, what?
No, so I decided he's the Doc Brown. So he needs 1.21 gallons of bottled lightning, and they're going to hit 88 meters a second. To make time travel possible. So they're working on this whole plot to help him make this happen. So, there's little things like that I throw in there. Like I joke that there's like a Ninja Turtle ending and there's a Ghostbuster ending, but they're not so much that they're each endings. It's just that like each of these possibilities may happen in a different order. And what they do with the NPCs that are working on those sorts of things, like the way that you guys as a party interact with them kind of determines what happens next. So like there's so many still like nefarious plots that like just are starting to get dropped in my game that I've had from the get-go. Like you think like that ritual where we turn Jeannie into a golem, like you think, oh man, I bet Dustin thought about that in the last 2 weeks because you guys killed her. But I had intended on there being golems from the get-go. You can tell because week 1, I picked a little gif of a mechanical beating heart to replace the 2 players who weren't there, just like I replaced your picture last night with one. Like you can look back and you see that the gears, everything that I have put art-wise out there, I have known that this was going to be part of the plot, like from the get-go. These machines and the stuff that, the witch stone and all that has been a core element. What you guys decide to create with it or what you become is completely then up to you. So as you guys work through these plot lines, these various different plot lines, I guess maybe that's what I'm doing differently now than what I did when I started GMing. Is like I'm layering my plots. I'm not making a plot. I'm making like 7 plots, and then I'm just waiting to see which ones get picked up and ran with, and which ones kind of die off. And is there any way to redirect plots that look like they're going to die off back into the story again? So I guess maybe that's more what I'm doing now. And I think maybe this last episode of Horror in Huttenberg really showed that more maybe than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, kind of looking back at the way you used to structure games, when we were in high school, it was very clear, like, here's the big plot, A to B to C to D to E. Yep. That's where it's going to go. And you're just there. They were good plots. They were well fleshed out. They had good stuff going for them. But from beginning to end, you were sitting in a chair. You were going along with the ride. And now it seems to be more of, like you said, different segments of story that are interconnected that we're just kind of bobbing and weaving through until we kind of figure out how they're organized.
Yeah, and a lot of this came from how I started with Terror and Treefell. Mm-hmm. Now, Terror and Treefell is a little more streamlined in its plot. There are 3 or 4 endings, not like 8 like Horror in Huttenberg has. But what I did there was I know we talked about this with campaign world building a few weeks back, but I didn't start with a world. I didn't start with a world problem. Mm-hmm. I started with a small towns problem.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And now we've built up to this is a individual cities problem. Mm-hmm. And then it will scale into the 3rd segment, which I'm not spoiling my name for that 3rd one that I'll run next year yet. But the 3rd one will become more of a global problem as it scales.
Yeah, but that's because the level, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So if you were to get these 3 modules when I'm done writing them, it would naturally take you to the progression of this small town issue that becomes a regional issue that becomes a nationwide issue. So that's what I'm kind of shooting for with it.
Massacre in Mobile. Nice one, Animal G. Good stuff.
That would be a good one, but the capital city, and this is already on the maps and everything else, is Valandria. So you got to figure out it's a V word. You need a V
victory.
Word. I put the word victory in there because I ain't guaranteeing you win. Nope.
Vandalism.
Nope.
Oh man. Yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, so it's interesting because obviously the stories that you could tell are different depending on which segment of gameplay you're looking at. Vivisection, yes, that's a good one. Quail DD. Yeah, Violation. Yeah, those are all good ones there, chat. Yeah, so it is kind of fascinating because I think the approach you're going with now kind of feeds back to, again, we always talk about this, but like our LARP days where there were lots of little plots and you have so many players involved, you're trying to like link them together, figure out what they'll bite on, and then kind of get them going. Soulstorm was? Oh, that's good times. So I think that's a kind of interesting approach too, because I think that's a very World of Darkness kind of vibe, right? Like I think there's something to that kind of personal scale of plot that I think lends itself towards that structuring. Like with a typical D&D adventuring game, you're not really looking at individuals doing things. You're looking at a group interacting with the world or some kind of threat or problem. Whereas I think with the Horror in Huttenberg or the World of Darkness, or what I'm trying to do, we'll see if it actually works, with Pathfinder 2e, is I want to do things that are more about what the individuals are motivated by, what their ambitions are, what obstacles come in the way there, that kind of stuff. And I feel like that's what you're kind of dealing with your game, because our group is very non-heroic.
Yes. Okay, so yes, you guys are a group of bandits. And through the first 2 game sessions, what I realized very quickly is you guys didn't care about anything except getting paid.
It seems that way. Or writing a good story.
Yeah, or writing a good story about people getting paid. So, and that's a very Zweihander, like if Zweihander has an issue, in my opinion, is that it's very economy driven. Okay. Like most of your character's goals is to literally be able to afford the bandages and stuff to continue adventuring. Like it's expensive.
It's like adventurers just have an addiction.
Yeah, like they have to have just some. Yeah, it really, adventuring is not really a thing in Zweihander so much. Like,
it's not very lucrative, that's for sure.
Yeah, like you twist an ankle and it's like you're done, like gold wise, like you're sunk. So it's a dangerous system, and as your group is finding out very quickly, it's a very expensive lifestyle to keep.
Very.
So a lot of Zweihander games really kind of, it's the easy bait is to just hold silver shillings and gold coins out in front of the group and then watch them go. But that doesn't make for very intriguing storyline. Watching people go do a job to get paid is not particularly intriguing.
Sure.
So what I had to do with your group that I did not have to do with the Terra and Trefel group was I had to take money off the table first by letting you get overpaid, ridiculously overpaid.
Okay.
And then I had to, once money was a little more off the table, find other ways of bringing it back in, like with other things. I think that's where this last episode really hit, was they finally started looking at the morality of the decisions they were making, and at 2 or 3 occasions weighing it versus the amount of gold they were willing to be paid to do these immoral things. Like, it was all well and good until they saw the dying dwarf girl's soul put into the golem to animate it. And then they were like, hey, this guy's going to pay us 50 gold crowns each, which is a ridiculous amount of money. And then they were like, well, crap, that's like a lot of money, but like, he's enslaving dead people. So it was kind of like all of a sudden the morality finally shot itself back in. So I think for that to happen for your group, though, I had to take money off of the table by paying you first.
Maybe. Because Jesus, chat. Because I think some of it is as a player of a character versus an actual character, there is a disconnect, I think, between wealth and the value of wealth, right? So, like, from a player's perspective, I think there's like the issue of, like the nice house, the good food, the whatever. Those things are great in real life, but from a player standpoint, they don't really do anything except for just check a box if you decided that's a box you care about. Whereas usually like power-ups or means to get to the next plot or something that makes you strong in some way is usually what players are into. So, like, obviously we made our characters more inclined to care about money. And so that was a motivator for the characters. But
right.
At the end of the day, I don't know that money really matters to the players, right? So then I think the scene that you're talking about, which I only partially got, was that there was a pretty strong moral issue at play. And I think maybe what's going on in this one is that the players looked at it and saw that this was something that could happen to me.
Potentially, yeah.
So I'm not so sure it's a moral thing.
Because, well, maybe not.
It's definitely a moral thing, but from
it's hard to say it's hard to say for certain. But they finally got their first taste of exactly how far this madman will go. Like, I think prior to that scene, no one really saw him as a madman. He was arrogant a little bit. He was sophisticated.
Come on.
I think they thought he was maybe a bad guy, but I don't think anyone had a real taste of exactly how bad he was. He has a German-sounding name, so naturally he's the bad guy, right? But so I think it was kind of one of those things where I think everyone kind of had a hint that maybe he was kind of a big bad end guy, but because he could summon lightning and thunder, like, everyone was kind of like, okay, he's not a guy to mess with. And oh wait, he's gonna pay us. So then it was kind of like, we'll work for this guy. So it's been an interesting couple of sessions, I guess, for my game, seeing how the players have interacted with the different plot elements and plot hooks. And
to put it out there from my perspective as a player and as a character, I don't think that any of them are good guys. I didn't see any of them as having a good idea that they wanted to put forth that I agreed with. It was like, all these guys are bad guys, and I don't want to deal with any of them. But there's a doing a book. I'm writing a theory about criminal behavior, and this is the epicenter of that. So where is this group taking me? That's where I'm going.
Well, yeah, your other players, none of them are good people, really.
Yeah, clearly.
The NPCs, though, Like, did you get a sense that all the NPCs are not good people?
Oh yeah. Not a single one of them is a likable, good fellow or lady. I looked at all of them and I went, mm-mm. They have some power, they have some clout, they have some ambitions, they have some ideas. I didn't get a single one of them and I went, that's my guy.
That's interesting, because I didn't really feel like I did too much to make either Alexei Arkwright or Hal Davidson seem all that imposing.
Hal didn't seem imposing, but the others all seemed like they had connections, like political power and power. You know, like, I have wealth, I have magic, I have super science,
Sure.
You know, I have henchmen. I will, you know, push something out there, right? So, like, all the characters I interacted with, I went, these guys are all batshit crazy, and they're all...
That's my MO anyway.
Sure.
So
yeah,
maybe just you knowing me. I'd be curious if the other players felt that way about it.
I don't know. Every single one of them I looked at and went, yeah, this person is, he's mad scientist. That one's mad scientist. That one's mad scientist. And they're all jockeying to be the worst mad scientist. Yeah, let's, what are they shuffling around? They're shuffling mermaid parts and biological weaponry and, building weapons and dismissing death and dismemberment of workers. Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna put this out there. None of you guys are good guys. Huh?
You know, I like to live in a morally gray world, and most of my NPCs will be pretty.
They're like
morally
charcoal gray. They're
some
very dark.
Some of them are a little darker than others.
Yeah.
Like I said, you don't have to go too deep into the bowl to see that Bravo von Helfrich has some issues as far as not being necessarily the best guy in the world. Now, again, you kind of have to Thanos him a little bit, right? You have to give him something that makes it seem like what he's trying to do isn't the worst thing in the world, even if it is technically the worst thing in the world. So, you know, I try with my NPCs to give them all motivations that the players can somewhat grab onto. And that requires a lot of sharp, you know, plot hooks. And so far, none of you all have gotten the V word right.
That's pretty incredible.
Sorry, keep trying, but you're all
That is
wrong.
a long list of E-names.
It is. But no, so those are things that I try to do. So, like, I try to give reasons why you might want to work for Halford, or you might want to work for Alexei, or you might want to, between the you know, the things between those two, you know, like, to pick one side or the other on their argument about who was wrong about the accident that took Halford's legs and got Alexei kicked out of the school. Like, there's a story there that you can explore a little bit if you want to.
Yeah.
Your characters didn't, I don't think, frankly, care one way or the other.
Yeah, I don't see them caring
so
outside of what it can get them.
They didn't really care.
Mm-hmm.
So again, then it became, I got to pay them to get them to move along into the next section until maybe they care more. Now I think they care more. Now they're like, okay, this crap we got's dangerous. We're seeing everything that can be done with it. So, you know, I guess that's where like I was saying, like, because I put all that time and effort into these NPCs, I guess that's what I've done with this game more than maybe in the others. I didn't even worry so much about the city. I don't have a city map for Huttenberg. You know, I have a regional map that has some dots on it with some names, but it's all of this, it's all NPC work. It's just putting all my time and effort into the 7 or 8 major NPCs, and then just waiting to see what goes on for there. Oh man, I wish I'd used
Nailed it.
Levi, but that's not true. It's not. It's neither of those words. You're all wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think NPC work is going to be the important one. You know, so like when we're talking about urban settings, I think cities are about people, right? They're not about places as much as a typical globetrotting thing. So that is something I think our two stories are going to have a lot in common. Things I need to start fleshing out in more detail as I kind of get into my game. But it is about interpersonal relationships and the dynamics that come out of those. And it's a matter of finding ways that matters to those characters. And so, like you said before, for our group is not the typical group that's going to run through this story. So, like, I guess before knowing what our characters were, that we were all kind of criminals and stuff.
Right.
Where
I started
did you start
writing this a year ago.
Yeah, so you came up with something much more neutral in range,
Yes.
I assume, since you didn't know what we were going to play. But
right, without giving away spoilers for the end, since you are a player and at least maybe one of my other players might be actually watching this. What I did is my first one, Terror and Treefell. Like I said, the point of Terror and Treefell was to ask the moral question: can I get a group of players, no matter what professions they are, to decide to sacrifice an innocent 8-year-old girl? That was the goal. The goal from game one. And I'm like, what kind of a story do I have to do to make this happen? So far, no one is right yet because none of you know the professions in Zweihander. Oh, you're closer with Valet. You're not there yet, though. But so what I did with Terra and Treefell was I said, okay, this is going to be based around this. This is going to be based around this grave robber's ghost. Mm-hmm. And so we were sitting there, and as I was thinking about this, I was like, so I've got to find some way to make this ghost like menacing, and also at the same time, I have to find a way to make him seem possibly redeemable. Because I kind of modeled him a little after Freddy Krueger, who's not redeemable in the slightest. You learn Freddy Krueger's backstory, and you're like, well, he was a pedophile, and there's absolutely no redeeming Freddy Krueger, right?
None.
But I wanted this guy's backstory when it came out to hit a point where you can be like, the people in this town are just as bad as him. The people I've been working with they're all living a lie based on these certain town elders and the things that went on, and like it's their bad decisions that are causing the ruin in this town. And now the party has to make that moral decision of this poor girl may have to pay the price for it, or everything may get destroyed. And my party couldn't make that decision. 2 of them wanted to, 2 of them didn't. They talked about it, whether giving this girl's life would be worth saving everything else. And then they just couldn't do it. So they brought this hellaciously bad demon into the world because of it. And then they had to deal with that for the final chapter of their story. So, it was all about, though, it wasn't ever about bringing that demon in. It was about making that demon the consequence if they couldn't do it. So, that was really the point that I need to drive home, was whether or not they would be able to make that decision once that decision was laid in front of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, and I think that's something that's going to be important. Like, I have a similar idea in mind for my game that I can't really ruin it for you guys, but there is something I put in the game deliberately to kind of push a theme. And we'll kind of come back to it here in a second. But Quail Deity 2 has used the Redeem Wisdom Check question to ask us, on the opposite end of the spectrum, have either of you started from a location concept context rather than an NPC context? And the answer to that is yes. I would say almost all of my early games were location or event centric, and then NPC secondary. I think that seems to be the more like intuitive starting point. Now, I don't know if that's just because of like the sorts of media that we consumed when we were younger or structured that way, or if it's I don't know, just easier to think of a place than it is a person.
I know when I ran the first 3.5 game I ran, this was back in my early college days, when 3.5 came out, I ran my Gatan game. And it was very centric because it was very centric to the place because it was about this mysterious land that suddenly appeared where it was well known there was no land before. So the mystery and intrigue was about what's there, what are we going to find, what is the purpose behind this place showing up. So it was very centered on that because it was very frontier, like discovering America, sort of frontierish kind of in its feel, and then slowly unraveling and discovering what this place was, why it was there, and ultimately the powers that be that were on it. So for me, that game I know I ran very location centric versus NPC centric.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't know, when I think of like fantasy games in general, it's always like the cool castle over blah blah blah, or the city where things happen, blah blah blah, or the monster of this type that you got to go vanquish. You know, like there's always like the primary concept is usually like a place or a thing to overcome, an environmental hazard or something. You know, like the big bad blah blah blah. And so I think for me that's kind of typical of like how most games we would start. I think for me though, like as I've kind of gotten older, I've gotten less interested in those sorts of things, and I've gotten more hyper focused into morality play. And
Yes, I think definitely.
Yeah, I think it's the same for you. And in order to have morality play, you have to have people. And unless you have interesting people, it doesn't work. And so whether I'm successful at that or not, that's going to be a big if. But that requires NPC work, I think.
So I think that what happens is, and you hear this a lot about GMs, when you make a centric plot based around a place, or a place in general, if you're not starting the characters directly in that place, you have to railroad them to that place or they never hit the plot. And what'll typically happen, and you hear this a lot as DMs and GMs say this, is like, hey, random NPC I created on the spot, they gravitate to him and they want to head over the hill that I drew on the map, but I have no idea what's over there, instead of heading to my well-defined plot line that I have created and worked months on. So for me, the answer is that you're not going to meet an NPC of mine who doesn't have a plot attached to him. So that if you gravitate to one I didn't quite expect, I can reroute and restructure the rest of my plots around it, because I'm not traveling you from point A to point B. You're living in the world where these plots all exist. You're always within arm's reach of all of them. And that's why I run city-centric games. And it's not so much a matter of it being an influence of Larp. Larp has helped me figure out how to do some of that, yes. But it's a matter of when I'm making interesting people don't necessarily all travel the way that an adventuring party technically does. So when I tell a segment of story, it has to stay localized in that place, because that's what people do. And when you're dealing with politics typically stay in one place. Unless you're getting into world politics, in which you have to have large-scale wars, or you have to have a large-scale threat like a dragon in order to make those politics happen, or in your case, a large invasion force.
Well, politics live where the players are. Or not the players, as in the people that you're playing
where
the game,
people live. Yeah.
But where the people have influence. So, like, if you're trying to do something political, it makes no sense for the political to be somewhere else, because that's not something that's important to those people directly. You know, and I think that's the big thing. There's some good ones here. So Levi
there's a lot of great V words out there, guys, but none of you are right yet.
I'm a big fan of ventriloquist. But another thing from Levi up here was another redeem wisdom check question. Is your theme for the game big ass crits? No. But that would be an easy achievement, because holy shit, those the first 2 game sessions were just dropping bombs on you guys. No, actually, some of what I'm trying to get into is I don't really want to ruin anything, but like I think it's fairly obvious. There's going to be a lot about ambition and about power, I guess is where I'm coming from. And so I dropped a genie into the first game session, knowing full well what players would do with a genie.
Make wishes.
You would take them and you would not let that genie go under any consideration, right?
Right.
You got infinite power. You're holding on to it.
I would just like to point out that I think as a group, yes. Luckily, I'm not the player driving this group, because I would look at Genie and be like, get me out of here. All right, peace out, Genie. Like, I'd be gone. You know what I mean? Like, hey, thank you for the follow there. 20 sides every story.
Oh, good name, too. Great. Thank you very much.
I thought we've seen 20 sides every story here before.
No, that's a new one for me. You've seen
I've seen 20 sides every story somewhere else before. Maybe it's another channel, but thank you for the follow.
Yeah, but I think one of the themes that's going to be running large in my story and like we talked about before, I like to do themes. Wow, we are around. This is a plurality of individuals here.
He is leaping.
Well, there's 20 sides apparently, so could be 20 NPCs in there. But yeah, I mean, the thing that I'm trying to get into is more of what people do with power, because like what I find in most games that we play in anyway is that the players are the force to be reckoned with. They go into a place, somebody disrespects them, they're gonna own it. If that person becomes villain, like to them just for being slightly annoying or disrespectful. And so there's like kind of an interesting dynamic of like what happens with adventurers in a city. Can they coexist with the world? What happens when you give them the tools to do whatever they want? Will they misbehave? Will they become villains? And we'll see.
Yeah, no, and I think those are the kind of elements I do like in a story. Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting as my part as a player in that story as to whether or not where my character ends up falling in that.
Yeah, like, you've got an interesting character for that. Yeah,
because he's kind of neutral, but like he kind of cares. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to see where I kind of fall in that. But again, I'm also made a character intentionally who's not the driver. Mm-hmm. He's very much an observer, and I very much intend to let the Spicy Mikes and the Dr. Jaspers kind of drive the plot. Mm-hmm. So
later, Animal G.
Later, Animal G. So it'll be interesting to kind of see like if I can put the driver's wheel in their hands, like how they react to these things, because that may shape very heavily, I think, what the group does based on who our characters are.
Yeah, we've got an interesting spread in that game. So I mean, we have Clint's character Burgeon being kind of like a naive child character is going to be an interesting thing to play around with, because I'm not sure what their drives will be initially. Initially I think it's going to be like I should speak differently. I don't know what they will evolve to be. And right now it's pretty clear. It's like a kid. Like kids are going to be like, good is good, bad is bad. Do the right thing. But
unless you're Baby Groot.
Unless you're Baby Groot, yes.
Unless you're Baby Groot. It's like, what's your language?
Well, it's all about age, teenage is, that's where things change. But I think it's going to be fascinating because, like you said, your character's pretty neutral, more inclined to just observe what's going to happen. But things will be occurring, and there will be plot elements at play that I think your character will want to have a hand in. And we'll see how that plays out. But some of what I want to kind of push through is, what do the characters care about? What do they want? What will they take? What will they push? What do they not want to have happen? Those sorts of things. And there's going to be a lot in the setting that I feel is going to be pushing and shoving, and I'm going to try to drive a sense of lack of control, because I know what players will do is push back on it, and try to assert control. And once you do, I'm interested in what that will look like and what that means for the characters.
Okay. I mean, you can't go into detail, obviously.
Yep.
But I'm curious about how you're trying to set that up, given player tendencies.
Yeah. Well, don't typecast me. Yeah, it's interesting and crazy. We'll see. We'll see how all this turns out. I'll be curious. We'll see how it plays. Now I'm going to get back to what you just said there. I'm reading Quail Deity's question real quick here.
Yeah, I was just trying to read it too. I noticed he didn't redeem it with his wisdom checkpoints, but we'll
how much do you all mold plots, themes around player PCs? Do you weave the backstories into it, like resolving backstory gets you to the next plot point? Well, if you look at Levi's game, Leviathan 4 here in the chat, he runs our Everstorm campaign.
Yeah.
In those, there is a heavy impact from story coming from players and background character. Wow, my sentence just train wrecked off the lane there. Let me start that over.
How about you start over Wave so you can edit this out in the YouTube video, Jeff? There you go.
Take two. In Levi's campaigns, he takes our backstories. He writes some pretty heavy player plots, and they do oftentimes either directly tie into the main plot or take a turn as the main plot. And so, like, in his games, absolutely. That is something I think is a pretty big asset to his skill set. And it's something that I will seek to emulate. With this set of characters we have right now for my game, those motivations and whatnot are not super clear yet to me. So I'm still learning about those characters and what their backstories and motivations are so that I can leave those things in. But I think that it's going to be one of those things where I'm hoping that the story will reveal the things that make those characters who they are. And from that, we will have a story that naturally becomes a player's story.
Now, I'll use Terra and Treefell because that story's already been told. Like I told you earlier, the goal of Terra and Treefell was to see if I could make a ghost character redeemable enough and a situation, vile enough that the party would decide what to do with the fate of this young girl. Now, when you actually watch Terra and Treefell, if you watch those 10 episodes on our YouTube channel, what you'll see is that there were things that crept up that were part of players' backstories. Scott, 12'9", a friend of ours, he was one of my players, Zazos. He played the character Nigel, and he wrote this entire backstory about his gnome, Sellsword, who came from Frumsburg, and they had a problem with a warlock, and he was part of a mercenary group called the Red Caps. Well, those Red Caps showed up later in the game. I didn't write them there initially, but there came a good point where I could insert his background into the story, not as the main story element, but as a element where his plot now revolves loosely around the main moral plot of the story itself. Not to derail it into Scott's backstory, but those things showed up as elements as part of that story. Zelina's background is heavily involved with what goes down in Terra and Treefell, and even in Horror Huttenberg, you're seeing part of her backstory starting to come out. Okay. You don't realize it yet, but if you watch those characters, you can see where some of the her plot elements are actually still coming out. And if you watch Terra and Treefell, you will know what the V is for the third segment. But you didn't watch Terra and Treefell, people, so you clearly don't know. But it has to do with another character's plot arc that I have saved, hopping over Horror and Huttenberg, and I'm putting it into the third setting. So some of those things that characters put into there, like, nope, it's not vengeance. But some of those things are definitely things that I weave in. They do not necessarily episodically diverge the way that we did with like Skeezers, where it was like we definitely went on like a 3-episode binge of like figuring out what was going on with skis. So I don't think that my game's ever been that far into one particular character's backstory. I keep the backstory sort of weaving slightly into the main plot arc is, I guess, the direction I go with it. I don't know how, do you feel like you will venge heavily into a Vagabond, the Traveler plot arc at some point through?
Well, when I start off writing a story, I have like a kernel of something I want. And then I talk to my players and I figure out what their characters are. And then what they give me tells me where this kernel should go a little bit. So like for me, I looked at you guys' characters and I realized there are certain things that were potentials from this central plot element that I'm not going to do. Whereas there are other things that I didn't intend to highlight that I think are going to be more important because there is a specific character involved. And so I'm going to utilize that character to tell that story. And so it's kind of a meeting halfway in the middle kind of approach. So like I think whereas Levi writes the story to be heavily intertwined with the main plot, and you're saying yours kind of floats in and out, I think mine is more of the plot is a culmination of the two. Okay.
So like in Horror and Huttenberg, Lindy's character, Ravita Baudelaire, she wrote that she was the daughter of this general. And so this just came out so this isn't spoiler because this came out last episode, finally. So she wrote that and sent that to me at game session 1. Now I had already planned in Horror and Huttenberg that the Emperor is going to arrive.
Mhm.
And he's going to arrive with an entourage. He doesn't just show up on his own. It's like the Pope. Like, you can't just show up.
Sure.
You got to have an entourage. So then it made total sense then that instead of that every time I made sure that that Lindy was aware, that her character was aware that her father would be showing up as a general with this entourage. So not every time I mention, any of the NPCs mention that the Emperor is coming in a few days, not only does it create timeline and pacing for my story,
Mhm.
and this dreading doom of like, these events are coming soon, actions have to be taken. It also, for Lindy's character specifically, is like 3 more days till I see my dad again.
Right.
Like, for a more personal level. And so last game session, it found one of the NPCs recognized her
Mhm.
and said, "I know who you are. You're the General Baudelaire's daughter." And then the other PC who was in that scene with her was like, "What?" So then it became like a small bit of this little bit of the story. And again, this is how it's just weaving into the main plot of the Emperor coming to Huttenberg and the other events that the NPCs are pushing towards about winning the Emperor's favor when he gets there with their inventions and this other stuff is the main part of this plot that the PCs are supposed to get involved in. But I had an opportunity then to weave that in and also take her character's father and make it the same one who kicked Asher out of Dragoon, out of the cavalry.
Mhm.
So now he has a bit of a tie to that other same character as well. So an NPC that I did not create myself, I'm now creating sheets for, because this is something that came out of a player's backstory that fits easily into my story, and I can weave it in the same way that the red caps in Terror and Treefell fit easily into the story, and I was able to kind of slide them in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something that comes up with storytelling, right? Like, I think we've talked about this in the past, that there are stories that are written where the plot is structured out, it's defined, it's clear, this is what's going to happen, here's where that goes next, here's the next bit, here are the people that are going to show up in scene 3, you know, like a story in a normal media, like the TV shows we're talking about before. And then I think there are other ones where, hey, we got a rating party from 20 Sided
rating party from 20 Sided
Story.
Story. Thank you for the raid and bringing a few viewers over here with you. So if you came over here, if you haven't already, give us a like, a follow, and hang out for a bit. We talk about what we do to help write and pace our stories.
That's pretty impressive, because 20 Sides of Every Story was in here watching us, theoretically, while their stream was going on.
Okay, hold on now. Hold on. No. Listen. I do this all the time. Near the end of this episode, when I tell you I'm going to go find a stream target, what I'm doing is I'm going into another stream and I'm checking while you're talking to see that they're running and not about to, close up. So I do the same thing all the time. So I know exactly what 20 Sides was doing. So.
Well, welcome, Raiders. We are having a discussion, as we do every Monday night, about gaming. Game topics. Tonight we're talking about structuring plots and the sorts of approaches we take as individuals. Not saying that we have all the answers, but there are different approaches to structuring a plot, laying it out, focusing on different concepts or NPCs or locations or PCs, that sort of thing. And we're talking about our different approaches to that a little bit. So, if you got opinions, if you've written stories, that kind of stuff, feel free to feed them into us. If you got questions, concerns, you want to tell us we're wrong about something, pipe up, let us know. It's interactive around here. So, and also I've been having some drinks tonight, so I'm a little loosey, so you can probably get some good stuff out of me. But we were talking a little bit about the fact that, I think when we were younger, we had more rigid plots. We had plots that, we knew where things were going. We knew that X, Y, Z were going to happen. These NPCs were going to occur, blah, 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 blah. And the PCs were just going to experience that. And I think what you're talking about now is you're talking about in your Horror and Huttenberg game,
yes,
which is a Zweihander campaign that he's running for us.
Zweihander RPG, yes.
That, you had a PC that came through and that said, like, in my backstory, there is an individual that's high up that's important to me, and I am a character who's got some problems as a result of decisions I make, like I go into jail and that kind of stuff. And now that's creating kind of a currency of dread and fear about this person arriving. And that creates an interesting plot element that you can then hone and kind of drive forward. So I think that's a pretty good approach to it, right? Like, you want to, I think, give some strength to a character based on what they brought to the table. It is a collaborative gaming space after all. So like the more a PC brings to you, the more you have to work with, the more automatic buy-in you're going to have, right? So I think that's pretty cool. Like what I said before, though, I think my approach is not that I've gotten a ton from everybody, but like I know that whatever somebody gives me as a background is something they are hyper focused on. That's something they are interested in, they're concerned about. That's what they want to explore with their character. So it gives me a lot to go on. So anything I can build off of that, I know is automatically going to win. Right?
Yes. Now, here's where the rubber meets the road for me. Is there's a couple of problems that I sometimes run into with this.
Yeah.
One, and this maybe happened a little in Terran Treefell to my own. I wasn't thrilled with the way this kind of worked out, but because I got backstory, a good amount of backstory and usable backstory from like 2 of the characters, and not necessarily from the others, I was able to weave in some stuff from those 2 characters, but I wasn't able to weave in as much maybe from a couple of the others.
Yeah, that's tricky.
And so 2 characters came out probably seeming a little more like the
tag along. Yeah.
Not the tag-alongs, but it was more like these characters were a little more the main characters, which is not intended, because I want it to be a party game. So I had to work very hard to like tie in the events with what bit of backstory I got. Now, as Wyhander makes their characters at random.
Sure.
So a lot of times people just leave it right at that.
And you get something random. It's not necessarily what you're interested in.
Yeah, you just take it, you're just rolling with it, right? I don't really have much of a backstory. I get like 2 lines from one player, and that's all I got, So like, whereas others, they seem very much more entwined with what the plot was. And so they came off maybe seeming a little more like the dynamic main characters. So that's something that when you're trying to do this, you want to do it, but then you got to be careful that you don't put yourself in too much of that spot.
Yes, but that's something we've talked about in the past, right? We've talked about, not everyone is going to want to be the center of attention, right? So there's a lot of players who do love the center of attention and will write you like 20 freaking pages of backstory with like every NPC they know and like all their interactions that will ever be. And then there's going to be some people who don't give you anything at all.
Or very little.
Or very little. They maybe give you a name, which is what I'm taunting Levi with right now by not giving him a name. So like, I think this is something that it kind of tells you a little bit about what they want in the game session itself. Because, if I have a player who doesn't give me a mountain of backstory, I have an assumption that they don't necessarily want to be the center of the story. Right?
I think there's maybe some truth to that. If they don't give you much, it means that either one, they're interested in whatever story you, as the DM or GM, have put together. So they're there to sink their teeth into the main course. They're not interested in appetizers. They don't care what the side dishes are that come with the entree. They just want the entree. And they're there for the entree. And if a little dessert happens after, maybe they'll like the dessert too. Mm-hmm. But that's what they're there for. And maybe because of that, what they're really there to do is just sprinkle on the special sauces on their steak, right? They're there for the A1 sauce. That's the role play. They're there just to role play their character, and through whatever shit happens, that's just how it goes, right? So I can make an argument that the people who maybe don't put a ton of background are there because they want the main plot to be their story, and they want to just role play through those series of events as they come. And I don't think it's wrong, but it does make that a little harder than then I think the onus then is put on the player to make sure that they do the buy-in part, because the GM can't do anything more about that. So that's where, as a player, you have to come in and then be like, well, I'm going to buy into whatever the plots are, because that's what I decided my character is going to be focused on.
Well, what I'm getting at, though, is that from a satisfying a player standpoint, that a player who jumps in and gives you a mountain of backstory is saying, I care about backstory stuff. I want this stuff to matter. Right. And if you get a player who says, here's my character sheet, what's going on? they're telling you, I care about whatever is happening in front of me, and I'm gonna deal with it.
That's what I'm saying. Right.
So long as the player is responsible for their own enjoyment, you're good to go. Like if somebody tells me I don't want a backstory story, I'm not gonna make one for them. Right.
Right. But here's the problem with the collaborative story. You're getting a backstory story if one person wants a backstory story. You're just getting that character's backstory story.
Sure.
So everyone else then has to adopt the mentality that, well, this character's backstory story is now the next chapter of my story, and I'm going to role play through it and make it somehow a part of a chapter of my story, which is what I very much do with almost all my characters anyway. That's how I treat my characters.
Well, that's the thing is, like I said, if you make, as an individual, as a player, if you make the decision to say, I'm not putting forth any new plot components, I am just here to consume the plots that are put before me,
right? Then
that's what you're doing, right? So like that's your choice. That works. If that makes you happy, awesome. But that's what you've signed up for. So like that's the expectations across the board, I would say. But as a storyteller, if I'm looking at a player and they're saying, hey, here's my character, whatever, I don't care, whatever's happening. Okay, I've met my expectation by saying there is a thing that's going to happen. You're going to be there. It's going to be great. Right. I don't need to worry about you feeling that you're not the main character because you didn't get a special side scene for you.
Right, correct.
Right. So like if I have somebody else though saying like, hey, here's something I want to explore, here's some themes I got, here's a backstory, here's some NPCs I'm talking about, blah, 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 blah. There's a bit of an expectation there. It's a player saying, hey, not only am I interested in the story you're telling, but this is something I specifically want. And so I feel like there's some, as a storyteller, I feel like that's my job, is to say, okay, I see what you're doing. I'm going to make sure that not only do I give you some lip service to your direct plot, but that my plot also includes some of these themes so that you're getting your fix throughout.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. I think that what you have to be careful not to fall into is too much of the game revolving around that additional theme to the point that one character becomes like the central character and everyone else then is just there for the ride. And that's what I was really trying to struggle with Terra Treefell as we went along, is to try to make sure that the characters all felt like equals at the table.
Yeah.
Because, and like I said, I had a main through line, and that through line stuck. But it did, by the time it was done, felt a little like it leaned a little more towards two of the characters than it did the others. So, it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to balance out, because you do want to include things from backstories that you get. But I think it is a careful balance to not make people feel like they're second fiddle, because then your players don't want to be there because they're not there to play second fiddle. They want the main story arc. They want the arc that they signed up for, that their character is designed to like go role play through. And if you get too much into like side story for the sake of one particular character, like for way too long, I think you can, or if it becomes too much of the central plot and not enough of the what seemed like a central plot, then I think you end up with a situation where people are like, well, I don't know if I'm real interested in all this. But
it's interesting because I don't know if I feel the same way, but like I think that if I was a player coming into a game and I was saying, I'm just here to see what happens, I'm just here to play along with whatever goes down, which is kind of what we're kind of describing here. I'm not going to give you much of a backstory. I'm going to give you a name, a class, I exist, and what's the story happening. Okay, let's go. If I have that and then we go do something, I feel like it's on me to buy in.
Right. No, I said that there's a certain amount of that's true. Yeah.
Right. But I don't feel like if somebody else put in a lot of effort and wrote a story and made themselves a pillar of the plot, I don't feel bad playing second fiddle because I chose not to be a main character by not making myself something interesting.
I think there's more truth to that when you're in a group like ours, where we know how our DM structures and organizes their plot. I think if you sat down for Curse of Strahd and it ended up, 20 sessions of let's go into Jeff's character's backstory on side plot. Yeah, that makes sense. You would feel very differently about that game. If you sat down at a table at a game shop ran by a DM thinking you were getting in on an orc crusade, and then it was really player X's backstory that you played for 5-6 weeks, you would probably not show back up again. So when you have a dedicated game group and you understand the dichotomy of what you're dealing with, which is most of our experience, but not probably most of the actual player experiences out there in the world that are dealing with these these issues. So when I'm saying when you're writing game, you do, again, this is session 0 stuff where you got to know that going in. Like, is the expectation to have a backstory or not? And if not, are you going to feel maybe a little slighted throughout the rest of the story? Probably, maybe a little bit if you're not there for just pure role play purpose. So like me, as long as I'm role playing, I don't care what the story is. Everything that happens, I find a way to make part of Bowron's story. It's either he'll come away with something that he wants for his horde, he'll find some way to take his mentality and inject it into a story. You know, I always find some way to make it part of it, so it doesn't ever bother me. Like, because it doesn't have to be Bowron's story for me to be interested in it, but everything becomes a part of Bowron's story.
Absolutely. So I'm doing that thing I always do during a show. I'll be right back.
Well, I will go ahead and take Quill Deity's Wisdom Trek Redeem question, and we'll just keep moving right on along with all these incorrect V words that everyone keeps trying to put into my title for the third section of my Zweihander game. And if you're interested in being in that Zweihander game, you just keep sticking around. And at some point, there will be a casting call put out there on our Discord. And maybe you could be in the next Zweihander game if you're enjoying Terran Treefell or this new one. But what we got right here is Quail Deity, too, asking, how do you handle the side character problem? Move the spotlight, insert backstory for them. I think it's a bigger problem for inexperienced players. I agree with you with the inexperienced players part, especially if you're in a group that does way more backstory involvement and you get a new player in who's not used to that. And no, it's not Vampire Soulstorm, but that's a good guess. But I think what you do with that is you have to, and Levi, I think, does a really good job with this. And Resin Hana is in here, and Resin Hana plays Morgaine. And Morgaine at session 0 was literally being created as we were playing it. So to say he didn't have a ton of backstory when he was creating his character in session 0, or session 1, I should say, really, like it was the first session with mine and Clint's character, right? And Morgaine was literally the amorphous blob being created as we were going. Now, I think Cameron did write a little bit of backstory stuff, but I think what happened is Levi picked up on the theme of what Morgaine was, and Levi has injected story into the game that Cameron has then adopted as his backstory and part of his story going forward. So I think what you do, Quell Deity, is you look at like what Levi has done with like Morgaine, where he created the song and he's created harmony, and he's now tied harmony to these other things. And if you haven't watched Everstorm, you don't know what I mean. But he's taken plot elements and made it Morgaine's story along with Cameron. So it was a collaborative story. It wasn't that Cameron came in with a backstory that Levi now has to find a way to fit into the main arc. But Cameron adopted parts of the story to become his own with Morgaine. I think that's maybe the best example I can think of for our regular viewers here that they'll pick up on. But for you, Quill Deity, I don't know if it's a matter of move the spotlight. I think some of that has to happen, but I think it's more of a, if you don't have a backstory to work with, you have to create a forward story for that character specifically along with your main plot, so that he has a thread now that weaves through the rest of the story. And I think that's the important element that gets missing if you only look at backstories and not a forward story. So that's, and I guess the forward story, we don't talk about that much, but the forward story is a concept that I use for all my characters. I'm a minimalist when it comes to backstory. I really am. Leave, I'll tell you, like, there's like 2 paragraphs on Bowron. Like, it wasn't much. I don't think I gave you much more than that on Vagabond. No, but because I'm a forward story person. I don't mind having some backstory so I have an idea who my character is, but like, I look for plot elements to make my own, as whether it's NPCs, events, things going on, and I make those my story as I move forward. And so to me, that's the collaborative part of the storytelling, is the forward part of the story.
Yeah, I mean, I agree to an extent. What I take that as is it's more important to me that a player comes to me with goals, aspirations, wants, dislikes, those sorts of things. To where, like, when they get into a circumstance, when they get into a scene, when they interact with something new, there is a direction that character will go in.
I think for me, it's about just understanding the personality of your character, understanding the archetype. That archetype really encompasses a lot of wants, needs, and desires.
It can.
I think a lot of times, like if I know that Bowron is a pirate, it's very, very easy for me then to say, well, what would a pirate probably do? What would a haughty elf pirate do in this situation? Like, he's a druid, so maybe I can go a druid route in the next scene because this scene doesn't really lend well to what would pirate do, but what would druid do? You know, and then, like, you know, more elements of Bowron get kind of formed as games go along. And it's like, well, now I got this really good idea of who Bowron is. And so when things come up, I know exactly, without having to have a huge backstory full of, well, here's all the things Bowron wants in his life, or it's going to motivate Bowron to do something. Like, just always reverting back to that single word concept or that single word idea usually empowers you enough to be able to do all that going forward.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this in the past, but I think most backstory is filler and isn't very useful, at least to me.
Right.
The more I've kind of looked at backstory, like, and I think this really came down to our time at Larp again, when we saw like hundreds of fucking character backgrounds, and you dig through them and you realize 99% of it was just words. Like, there was nothing there. It didn't tell you anything about who the person was, how they would behave. It didn't say what they cared about. All it said was what happened to them or where they came from.
And 99% of the time, if your character backstory showed up, it was because an ST decided he was going to take a shot at killing you. That is usually what happened. You grew powerful enough that you landed on the ST's radar. Out of the 50 players, they were like, hey, this guy's starting to get potent and powerful, and he's making a name for himself. What's his backstory again? What? He's from a family of werewolves? Oh, shit. This shit's going down. Like, that was how backstories came out in LARP. It was until the meantime you were just another character walking around Elysium until your backstory showed up. I mean, you were just kicking down Monster of the Week, you know, until that happened. So
Soulstorm is saying something that's kind of interesting here too. Sorry to cut you off.
Go ahead.
She's saying she's currently scared of lore-heavy campaigns now. That she's super excited for the one that she's in, but she feels lost all the time due to the work. I mean, the thing with that is if you're playing a character who should know the lore, then it's an issue. If you're playing a character who is just a character, you don't need to know all the lore. And I know you guys are playing Werewolf in particular, which is a World of Darkness game, similar to what we were just talking about. The beauty of that is if you're just playing a person who's being exposed to the world, the confusion and shock and lack of knowledge is actually an asset to your roleplay.
It's on brand. It's what you want. Like, it is the first time you encounter a new system in a new world, you are the most pure role play you're going to be able to do, because you can't possibly metagame because you don't know anything about it.
And everything in the World of Darkness is a type of setting where discomfort, paranoia, awkwardness are kind of like tent poles. Like, they're
it's very on brand.
Like, when you're the new person in a World of Darkness game, not you as a player, but as your character, when your character is a new person into a new scene in a World of Darkness world, it's like somebody just peeled back the curtain and suddenly you look in there and there's an entirely different world back here and it's filled with awful stuff. And you're going like, well, certainly that's the worst of it. And then they peel back another one. You're like, holy crap. Okay, what have I got myself into? And then it just keeps going and going and going. And you're just overwhelmed by it. And that's supposed to be the case. So, like, don't feel bad about that. Like, now, that's actually good, I think.
I agree with Soulstorm, but I don't care about lore for a world. I have a problem with strong IP.
Yeah,
like,
me too.
I would not run a Harry Potter game.
I wouldn't either.
Based in the Harry Potter world. I would not run Star Wars unless I was going to put myself in a part of the galaxy where there's not really anything written about it. Like, and this is because I homebrew, you know me, but like, I don't care for dealing with Forgotten Realms because you find yourself boxed in by the lore.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
And in that way, I'm the same way with Soulstorm. Like, it doesn't bother me to not know the lore of a system if my character should not know all the lore of a system or something like that, the way World of Darkness does, because your character's just being exposed to it. But when you live in a world where you should know all these things and you don't because you're not exposed to the lore at a level that you understand it, like, then I don't enjoy it. Like, that was always the hard part for me getting into the couple times we tried Star Trek. I was not a Trekkie. I didn't watch enough. I didn't know the lingo. I didn't know what to do with my character. So I just made him mostly comic relief and participated in the combats because that's the part of the sheet I could use that I knew how to use.
Soulstorm, you're asking what IP is. It's intellectual property.
Intellectual property. So when you're talking about IP, like I said, like if you were running a game that's literally based in the Harry Potter world, or if you were running a game that's based in Aliens, like me and Chuck from Defenders of Cobalt were talking after the game with Lindy about the new Aliens game coming out, and I said I have problems running Aliens because anyone coming into it who's an Aliens fan will be able to realize the twists and turns that are coming because it's aliens. Now, if I just create a space game where I'm using aliens, you don't know what they are, you don't know what they can do, you don't know their limitations, you don't know what you're getting. And to me, that's more fun for me than running xenomorphs. So
yeah, it is a challenging thing. Yeah, because the problem with the IP, intellectual properties in this case, like Alien in particular, like, yes, I am a pretty big fan of the Aliens franchise. I know a lot of it. I pay attention to it. And because of that, if I run into a game that isn't doing it correctly, quote unquote, let's put big freaking air quotes on that, I get disappointed. And that is not a good recipe for a good story.
Right. And so, yeah, exactly.
If you go into it with certain expectations, that's what you were talking about earlier. You were saying if somebody sits down for a Curse of Strahd game and they get somebody else's backstory game, they're upset. I think that's an issue of expectations, right? When you sign up for a alien game, you know you're going to be Ripley, you're going to deal with the Queen, blah, 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 game over, man, game over, right? If suddenly, well, hell, look at the Prometheus movies, right? Like, people did not enjoy those movies, and there are some reasons for that. Some of those were expectations, right? And some of those were just, it was a fucking terrible movie. But it's interesting. You know, it's the same problem I have with Star Wars. Like, if you know everything, it's bad. If you don't know enough to get it right, it's bad. Like, there's no, like, happy gray middle ground in there somewhere. And so, it's frustrating.
So DM Chuck and Matt Jowett, who's going to be our guest, like, next week, I think, they were taking turns, each one running an episode of a Star Wars FFG game, Fantasy Flight game, Star Wars. And one of the players in there is a good friend of ours from Notorious DMG, Boffrin. Boffrin's a huge Star Wars fan. So we're in here, and I'm playing a droid. INB4U was my call designation for my droid. And so, you know, I'm this quirky little droid that I'm playing. So, like, you know, me and Chuck are talking, and, like, I don't even know what the thing is technically called that, like, comes out of the droid that, like, R2, like, plugs in and, like, twists around to, like, do whatever droids do. So Chuck just started calling it a dangle, for having a lack of a better term, right?
Oh, that'll offend somebody. Yep.
No, but this is the funny part. So that's the level of, like, role play that's going on between me and Chuck as a player and a DM. And then it's like Boffrin's turn. He's like an Imperial officer, and he knows all the names of the actual codes and the protocols and everything else. So he's like asking Chuck questions, but Chuck, as the GM, doesn't really know all that stuff at the same level Boffrin does. He doesn't know how to answer all of it. So he's just kind of like rolling a little bit like, sure, yeah. Like, so it's funny because when you get somebody who's super into the lore at a certain level, like, they'll ask these, like, kind of real specific questions sometimes. It is nothing wrong with the way Boffer's doing it because he just is a super fan of this setting. But it is hard to GM that because then you don't know the answers.
Right. And
that's a tough thing to do. Like, does the GM need to be the most knowledgeable person at the table for a system that has IP? Maybe. But
well, it depends on who your players are. You know, if you have a Bofferin, then yes, Bofferin should be running the game, unfortunately. I mean, what Soulstorm, what you're saying there is that you're feeling kind of stuck in the middle of things, in that middle ground, like I was talking about. Yeah, I mean, I think if I'm new to a system, hey, VTAC, thank you for the subscription. Much appreciated.
Hey, yeah, thank you for the sub.
If I'm new to a system and I am concerned that I will feel lost, I will make a character who is likewise lost.
Right, so you can explore the system as your character, and you and the character learn at the same time. Right.
Also, if I'm playing a character and I'm lost, but I want to come across as if I know something, I'm going to talk to my GM and say, hey, yo, are there skills that my character should have to represent their understanding of the world? And if I take them, can I make rolls for you to pump me full of info?
Right.
And if that works, cool. You know, like, I don't know if that's the best way of handling it, but I think that that's a way I could get away with it and feel okay with it.
Yeah, I can see something like that. That's not a bad way of approach to some things like that. I just think that at the end of the day, and I'm not picking up off at all. I guess I did a fantastic job with the game session. We had a ton of fun. It's just like you could just see his level of knowledge was far beyond the rest of us. Like you could just tell, like the true fandom that he had for Star Wars in that game session. So, and I think when you run across people like that, it very much is and I'm not picking a Star Wars either. Like I said, you can have it with Harry Potter, you can have it with anything else. For me, it's always about, can I put myself in a corner of that world where there isn't a lot of books written about, or I avoid it. Or in case of like Harry Potter, it might not be a corner of the world, it might be timeline. I might move myself into the future to the point where Harry is dead and gone or really old, and deal with a whole new generation of wizards underneath him, so that it has the Harry Potter feel, because you got maybe those guys are the instructors and everything's happening to a new generation of wizards or something, where I can roll with it that way. You know what I mean? And go that route. Like that's the other way. World
as opposed to the individuals. The problem with Harry Potter in particular, or Star Wars in particular, is that they're character specific, like they're saying in the chat here right now. And that if you have a franchise called the character's name, it's hard to take that character out of it and still be that thing. Right?
Agreed.
And Star Wars, it's not called, Luke Skywalker, but come on, it's Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. That is what the show is,
Right.
So you take them out of the equation. If you're not playing those characters, what are you doing in there? It doesn't necessarily feel right.
They now refer to those 9 movies as the Skywalker saga. It's not the Star Wars saga now. It's the Skywalker saga officially, and the anthology films are now the anthology films. Rogue One, Han Solo. And then they never made any more because Han Solo sucked. But, they were the anthology films after that. So,
Sarah has an interesting question here.
Yes, I saw that too. I was going to get that.
It's not redeemed, but we'll answer it.
We will answer.
Yazera says, have a question for you two. How do you feel about the DM playing a PC as well?
Does not compute.
Don't like it.
Maybe I don't even know what he's talking about.
Okay. So what he's talking about is, let's say you have a party of PCs, and the DM makes an NPC that is actually a PC as well. That he
does not compute.
Yeah.
All things run by the DM are NPCs. Don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry. No, you can have your buddy NPC that runs with you from the beginning of the game to the end of the game, gains level every time you do, and is an active part of every combat that you're in. It's an NPC.
Okay.
It's an NPC. It's not a player character because you're the DM.
I think that's technically true.
That's how I feel about it. Like if
you go by the world of definitions, that's absolutely true. I think it depends on the group size. I tend to not like to have companion NPCs to begin with. I think that's a trait of our group. I think it has to do with group size, though. Like the more people are in the group, the slower game gets, and the less focus there is for an individual player. And as is, the storyteller is literally every single other thing or person or place in the universe outside of the PCs. I don't like a storyteller saying, also, hey, guess what? I need more stage. That drives me fucking up the walls. So as a storyteller, I'm going to avoid that personally. Now, if it's something your group enjoys, definitely do it. Don't let me rain on your parade. But I don't know. Yes, the game is collaborative. And yes, it is true that there are no such things as winners and losers, right? But technically, as a storyteller, you are the adversary in many facets to the party. And it just doesn't quite work to me to be on both sides of it, to be controlling the level of power on both ends of the fence. I think it's weird.
To me, again, they're just NPCs.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you take a character, and it doesn't matter, again, spoiler alert, for those who ain't watched Neverstorm, Dibben has been with us since game 2.
That's true.
Burl has been with us since game number 1, session 0, really. Now, those characters may be with us until the end of the game. Whether or not they have a character sheet is irrelevant. Levi plays them. Oh man, Soulstorm finally got it.
Vigilante.
The Vigilantes of Elandria will be the third section of.
Well played, chat.
Well done, Soulstorm, for sticking it out till you got it right. The Vigilantes of Elandria will be part 3 of.
Nice, man. That killed a sentence right in midstream there. That was good.
Yeah, it did. I didn't want it to slip by and her continue to look for V words until she. But no. But I think I don't even remember what I was saying.
That's good, man. I lost track of it too. We'll come back to you here if it percolates back up. But Ysera's saying something that I think is absolutely correct. It's like playing chess with yourself. Yes, it is an exercise you can do. There is something there to it. It's just... There's an M word that it brings to my mind that I don't think is necessary in a game session.
No, okay, so where I was getting back to is we have like Dibben and Burl, who are very long-standing NPCs. It doesn't matter if they have a sheet. It doesn't matter if they go into combat with us, which Dibben has done on occasion as a healer, or if they interact with us or anything else. It's still an NPC. So if you're as a DM or GM, if you're putting too much of your spotlight on your NPCs, whether you consider them a PC or not, what you're really doing is not putting the spotlight on your players. Your player character really is where the spotlight should be. If you want an NPC around to interject certain elements into a game or something, that's fine. Those things should definitely be there. And Levi does that quite well in Everstorm. He's got a shit ton of NPCs around, and they all play their part. So they all have their thing that they do, and I think what Levi does is he draws very good lines about like, this is where this character's influence begins and ends, and this is where the players have to take back over. And I think that's what you have to do with those things. So I don't know if you need NPC guy to be quest along guy. And the best example I can use to relate to this is if there's any World of Warcraft players, when you finally got to fight Arthas, and you're defeating Arthas, and then Fordring what's-his-name shows up and gets to be super bad NPC guy who takes down Arthas. Is that a little anticlimactic as a player? You know, like,
yes,
when you think of the way that cutscene then cuts in, it's a cool cinematic, but that's essentially the NPC buddy coming back in at the last minute to be the guy who then does the thing instead of you as a group doing the thing. So for me, that's how that feels to me.
Yeah.
If that happens in my game, is that the NPC at the end of the day was really who the story was about. And you don't want that to really be the case unless that NPC is going to ultimately become the villain.
Yeah.
If there's going to be a plot twist near the end where they've been playing you the whole time or something, like you can weave that element in or do something cool with that, then that's all right maybe. But to get to the end before that happens you may never get to that end because the players may not feel like they're an important part of the story before you get to that twist. So it'd be a very hard thing to do. But I guess for me, that's kind of where I feel with the NPC.
This guessing game is ridiculous.
It's all over. We got it. It's over.
Yeah, I mean, that one's got to win now. I think there is some element of as a DM, if you're a forever DM, you just want to play. Yeah, that's a thing. It's still not a good idea, in my opinion.
Here's an idea. Spread your wings. Find a game to also be in a player in. Mm-hmm. You probably have a game shop. You can find them online now. People find groups all the time to be players in.
Yep. So there's that. I don't know. I think you guys were talking about it before, though. If you're the DM and you're trying to play a PC in an honest fashion, it's never going to feel good to the rest of the players if your character figures shit out. It's never going to feel good if your character is the one that solves the plot, wins the fight, finds a secret thing, does anything, right? So you have a strong bias to not be the victor of a scene, at which point you're not really a player. You're just a dude pretending to be playing. and or you're trying really hard not to be the one that wins, which isn't fun either. So I don't know. It's just a big exercise in pissing yourself off, I think, and pissing off your players. I really,
Right.
that feels like a minefield that you do not want to get involved with. And I think it's something most new DMs or GMs or young players in general fall into, because I think there's I don't know, there's a lot of like feelings involved when you're younger, with gaming experiences, and you want to have an experience, you want to win the game, you want to have the coolest item or whatever. And that brings this up, but like you got to get past it because it doesn't work. Like no matter how you slice it, you can't be a writer of the story of the mystery you're trying to solve. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Like, I think what happens is, if you want to know where I think this phenomenon comes from, I think what happens is everybody wants to play in a game that they run. Everybody makes the kind of game they want to play.
That's true. That's true.
So I think the lure for DMs is, I'm going to make this really cool story. And not only have I plotted this whole thing out, but it's also the kind of game I want to play in. So I'm going to make an NPC that just gets to play in the story along with the characters. And if they ever try to diverge too much or can't get it, I'm just going to interject in to make sure it moves right along the rails like I want it to. And this character, thus this NPC, essentially then becomes the engine of the train.
Yeah.
That's dragging everyone else along the tracks of the story instead of the player characters driving the story. They're just along for the ride. And that's what I don't like about it. And that's why I completely shoot the phenomenon down as even being a GM run PC. It's a NPC from the get-go.
Quail deity, easy fix, just never plan, full improv. That helps. I mean, that is a way you can do it.
But
you can play speed chess against yourself, and maybe that's a real experience. Still don't think it's a real experience. Which is funny because that just happened in a show I'm watching right now. But I think it's just something to avoid. And never feel bad about opening a can of worms on this show. We are a conversation show. We are here to interact with the chat.
absolutely.
And when you guys feed us something that we just dive into and start like chewing on, that's a good thing. So please do that more often. Yeah, I think it is a new young DM thing, like I was saying before, and that you guys seem to be agreeing with here. It's just tough trying to get into gaming as somebody who gets stuck as the forever DM. You want to get a chance to play. The other players aren't doing it. Like Dustin said, go find another group that can DM for you.
Go find a group. If you got a good character idea and you want to play it, don't throw it into your own game, or make it an NPC and enjoy the bit of playing you'll get to do with it. Go find another game to play it in for real. Like, there's games out there. I'm sure I have faith in all of you out there that you can find one.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and Quill Deity, I am with you on a fairly large amount of improv. Some of we've talked about this a lot on the show, but the games where I put a crazy amount of work into planning and detailing and sculpting a perfect scene and getting it going and thinking this is going to be great, having the best NPCs I can write, I put them in there and it's okay. The PCs have a decent time. They skip over like 90% of the stuff I thought was going to be cool. And it sort of works, but it works in a way I wasn't expecting. And then I have to kind of deal with repercussions of my players gravitating towards something that I wasn't really into. The games I've done the best in are the games I literally went, shit, I have no idea what we're about to do. And then just something happens, I wing it, something cool happens, and then in retrospect I go, that would make a lot of sense if X, Y, Z, and all these things linked together. Cool, that's what's going to be the next game. Bam. Right. And it works. So I'm with you on that. Buddy.
And also, if I end up with an NPC that I really like, I reskin it, redesign it slightly, make it adjust to the storyline that somebody else is going to do, and I make it my next PC in a game that, and a lot of people never realize that's where it came from necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you can always kind of do that too. Or if they have no idea of the original one, you could literally take that character as an NPC and then make it a PC in another game. But you then also have to you have to kind of disassociate from the story you've written for it to that point as well, and realize that may all become just a backstory, and the new story may have nothing to do with where you want it to go.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's a hard thing to do, because then you have to, I don't know if you want to call it killing your darlings, but you definitely are have to be aware that it's not going to play out the way that NPC is going to play out in your game, where you have full control over the NPC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
what is Animal G?
Animal G left.
He left earlier and said that
to do the beating.
Yeah, he had to do the sleep thing.
Yeah, so Animal G definitely plays a lot of. Wow, that is an interesting take on the the chatter underneath my name there. But yeah, Animal G took off, but he does play chess, so yeah. There's a lot to be said about chess and AI integrations and stuff, but I'm not going to get into that stuff just yet. But
tune in next week for Chess Talk, where we'll have our guest.
We'll talk about automation of chess AIs and how it's really a simple search algorithm. Don't worry about it, guys. It's super easy to write. I've written it many times. But, yeah, Soulstorm, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of memory stuff there. But, I think that's something true about gaming as well after a sufficient amount of experience is gained. Like, it is a lot of rehashing of things and repackaging of stuff. So, like,
right,
over time, you're going to discover very quickly that no matter what you come up with, it's derivative. Like, there's nothing new ever. Like, it's impossible to come up with something new. Like, I don't even know comics. When we played the Marvel superhero game that Levi ran, I was like, oh, I'm going to come up with an interesting power that I think is unique, and I'll come up with a crazy name. And I picked a power and a name, and it turned out to be a freaking hero that already existed and a power that already existed with the same freaking name. I was like, you gotta be shitting me.
To me, it's about repackaging and reapplying different themes to power sets.
Yep.
We played a Aberrant game, and I played a character who could manipulate matter. Now, technically, that means he has the same powers as Apocalypse from the X-Men. Incredibly powerful villain. Well, I was not playing Apocalypse. I was playing a character named Meltdown, who was a welder. Oh, thank you for those bits, Radiator RPG. So, I was playing Meltdown, a character who had the ability to manipulate matter, but he used it in a specific way and had a very different personality based around that. So it did not come off as Apocalypse at all because of the way that I designed the character who was harboring these powers.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's those things that you can kind of do.
Yeah, you could reshuffle and repackage things.
And I think that's what a lot of what I do. Like I said, for my Horror and Huttenberg game, I got like 7 endings, and half of them are based off of 80s TV shows or 80s cartoons. And that's very loosely based, not like strongly based, like loosely based off of some 80s lore, if you will. Like I said, anyone who watched the last episode, probably picked up that Alexi Arkwright and his Arkwright Cauldron is very much at the core of trying to Doc Brown the shit out of this and make time travel possible. So,
yes. Well, I mean, sometimes you do have to lean into it like that.
So I leaned in a little harder onto that one, but no one's quite picked up on the Ninja Turtle ending or the Ghostbusters ending yet. Like, those things haven't quite happened yet, but there's those things are still lingering out there. The Voltron ending is totally out there, maybe, but if you watched Horror and Huttenberg, my Zweihander game, there was a reference to 1.21 gigawatts, but it was not gigawatts. So
it was not gigawatts.
It was not gigawatts, but and one of my players, Chuck, picked up on it, and he leaned into it pretty hard once he realized it too. But those are the kind of things you could do. You take something that's recognizable, and you have to reskin it to the point that players maybe at first don't realize that's what they're dealing with until they get to there, and then they're like, oh hell, I don't think anybody picked up on Alexi Arkwright being a Doc Brown character the first time they met him. But now they met him this time and talked to him and worked with him a little more, and then it was like, oh hell, So my game is Horror and Huttenberg's full of pop culture references. So Radiator RPG there is one of the rules developers for Zweihander.
Yep.
I don't think I didn't see you sneaking in there, Radiator RPG, with those bits.
Rolled in with the 33. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I said, I have about 8 endings for that where it can ago, and they're all somewhat loosely based off of 80s pop culture references. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that's something that writers, storytellers, whatever. Quail DD, I'll talk to you about that Grover's algorithm thing a little later when we're not on the show. It was in a quantum algorithms course at DePaul University. But at any rate, it's fascinating because when you talk about storytelling, it's important to note that nothing is unique, nothing is new, except for who you're talking to. So, like, if your audience is different, the way that you package that particular sameness is important. And that becomes a novelty, right? So, like, you could tell the apocalypse story, but if it's to somebody unique, if that person has a particular angle that they're coming at it from, and you can channel it in a way that hits that person, then it's successful. And I think it's like, you look at a lot of the shows that we watch, there's a lot of things that are common, or maybe they're dealing with the same kind of philosophical points. Right. But each one is unique in the way they decided to tell it. Like, the content wasn't unique, but the way they packaged it was, and that makes it important. And I think that's the way it is here with all this. With gaming, get away from the idea of novelty. It's never going to happen, and if it does, who cares? Right. Pick things that are interesting and that make you feel something, and that's not always easy.
Maybe it's just me. Like, I don't get too terribly emotionally mushy. Like, I don't care if you want to feel something, like, that's all cool, but like, I'm not leaning for, I'm not the kind that I'm going to push the point to like sobbing tears, like in a game, just in general. Like, I like to keep my games a little more fun, adventurous, and like I said, I don't have a problem with dealing with the morality of situations, but and I definitely push for that part of it for sure. And the decision making process by a party is incredibly important, in my opinion. But I think like what I'm doing with like a Horned Hunter, like it's almost kind of Pulp Fiction-ish, where it's like, hey, there's the briefcase. It's kind of the MacGuffin, so you can use these standardized things like MacGuffins, and you can put them in your game and they'll work. They'll work just fine, but you have to be careful how you package them. And then they do brush up against something where the players suddenly realize, like my game, when they ran up against needing the 1.21 gallons of bottled lightning. They now, once it kicks in and they realize the situation they're in, then they get that payback, that, oh, I know what this is now. Like, so, then they get that nostalgia feel of it without it being like on the nose, but not too on the nose.
VTAC, you're saying, are DMs really telling stories or something else? Stories are told to you. Gaming, D&D, isn't sitting on the floor listening to a storyteller telling you what happened. You're up and active in it. It is something different. It's collaborative storytelling is the phrase we like to use. There's a reason why we talk about the social contract at the table in pretty much every episode we have. It is something different. It isn't the same medium as writing. It's not the same medium as television. It's not the same medium as improv theater. There's something else to it that is unique, which is what's beautiful about it.
I think VTAC, to answer your question, is that maybe storytelling is not the right word. It's story creating. It's story writing. It's collaborative story writing. You can refer to it as telling a story, yes. But I think in the way that he's kind of referencing there is that, like, you're not really telling a story. What you're doing is you're creating a story that you're going to tell again later to other people. You're going to tell you're creating a story that then can be told.
You're experiencing something.
Yeah. So I think in that way, it's very much maybe storytelling is not the right word to use, but that is the common parlance of our hobby. So
maybe I don't know what this word means. I don't know.
don't know what it means.
I don't know. Maybe there's something to it that I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'll let that be sorted out in the chat. You do your thing.
Say chat. You just keep being you, and we're just going to keep talking about game stuff. So,
I enjoy the notion of the give and take, the lived experience of the characters, and the embodiment of character by players. And like you were talking about earlier, our group doesn't tend to get super emotional.
No. With
our scenes. In fact, I would say we were kind of like repellent to it almost.
I'd say Timmy does.
Tim does, yeah, but
Tim does. He's probably the most of the group.
I like it. I want to get into it, but our group doesn't do it, so it doesn't work, right?
That's what I love about Adam Rose. He gets me. He knows exactly where that quote comes from. So, but yeah, no, our group. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I had to acknowledge Adam's being correct on the Big Lebowski quote. So, but you were saying our group doesn't typically get too emotional. I'm saying Tim, I think, does.
Yeah, well, I think Tim is an actor, so like I think Levi is also an actor, but I don't think in the same way. Like I think there are different styles there, and as a result, I think there's a willingness for Tim to get really invested in a person, feeling the emotions, to portray those emotions publicly. Whereas I think a lot of our guys in our group are a little bit more closed off on that front. You know, whether that's a maybe positive sometimes. Or not, I don't know. But it's just what they want or don't want in a game session. I do think that personally I would like to see more of it in our group. Because I do feel like there's a lot of scenes that happen that I'm like, oh, this is heavy. This is such really cool. And then people are like, uh-huh. You know, I'm like,
yeah, no, and that's totally going to be the case. I think a lot of times
it's going to be most of the time. I think, but
yeah, no, and I think that's totally going to be the case. I think, like for me, I know I've played some characters that have hit those levels, but I didn't build them with the intent of them being that. But the story took me to those places where those characters then ended up being that way. Like I think of like my Larp character, Landon Kane. I didn't go into making Landon Kane thinking that he was going to be a character that was super emotional.
Yeah.
But by the time he got done with his relationship with Maylee Doyle and then her death and a lot of the stuff that happened, like it started to realize that like I needed to really hone in on the emotions of exactly why Landon was always so angry and why Landon was always so, you know, this, that, the other, like all those other things that came around of being part of it became a big part of who he was in his story. And occasionally somebody would work through the chiseled outer anger of Landon to get down to that softer part down inside. Now, Ben Stone, who is a friend of ours who played that game, he was exceptionally good at it. And he would occasionally have a scene where his character would get in there and realize it. And he would just be like, oh, I see you now, like for real, you know? And you can have those things happen, but that was a character where that was true.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there's a part of that it could be true with like Bowron. We're just not there yet.
Huh.
But it's 100 game sessions, so it's going to take a little while. Like, I paced this out knowing I got 100 games to work with this in. So the evolution of Bowron is based on the idea that it's 100 games to see this evolution happen. It's not going to happen the first 20 games and then him be static for 80 games after that. Like, he's built for the long haul. So,
Quail Didi wants to know, how much do you invite players into the plotting process?
Ooh, as a GM, how much do I ask them about the plot? Well, we know Jeff's answer. He runs GM plot on Wednesdays, and we're not allowed to watch it. That's how much he invites players into the process. You, the fans, get to help him, though, but not us, the players.
It all depends, I guess, on what you mean by inviting them into the process. Like I was saying before, I like the idea of bringing their story into it, seeing how they react to scenes, what occurs in a scene. Like if I watch a scene unfold, particularly if it's between two players, and they do something that is completely unique to what I was writing, if it's something that creates an emotional moment, if there's a heaviness to it, or if there's a humor to it, or whatever, I'm going to suddenly look at that scene and go, okay, what was going on with that worked? Why did that resonate so well? Okay, clearly they've struck something here. Let's work with that. And I'm going to try to keep on with that. So it's not like a direct, like, hey, come on over here, you tell me what the next plot's going to be, so much as if I see something that's magical at the table, I'm going to try to exploit it.
Sure. I think what the way I answer that question is I will inquire with my players about specific things from their backstory so that I can find ways to weave some of that in. I don't think that I put players directly in the plotting aspect of it. When I describe my plots, I describe my main plot as the spinal cord, the spine of the creature, and players get to decide how many arms, legs, ribs, heads it has. All I'm guaranteeing is that there is at least one head, and there's a tail, and there's a spine that runs through it. Everything else that this creature ends up looking like is put on by the players along the way. So, so in that regard, I don't ask the players if there's a head or a tail or a spine. The answer is yes. But how many ribs are attached are absolutely up to the player. And I inquire information about their characters from them, or get a sense of them playing their character. Maybe sometimes even more, that inspires what I do next. So I think that's maybe more how I go about it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of discovery that happens in games that are good. And I think that phrasing that I just used was important there. In that when I'm in a game where I know what my character is beginning to end from the start, it's not as good as a game where I go into a scene and holy shit, something happens. And something is evoked. Something comes out of a character that I didn't expect, but was obvious in hindsight. That's what I'm looking for. And I think that's the way stories evolve too. At least when I'm successful in storytelling, I look back and I see those moments that they've happened.
Right.
Now, did I intentionally make them happen? Usually not. Do I know what caused it? Not necessarily. And earlier I see that we are at our usual stopping point.
We end when we want to, when it's just me and Jeff.
We end when we run out of booze.
That's right.
But yeah, I don't know. Like, there's some sessions I'll go through and it's just a crap session. I'll be like, nothing was really gained or lost in the scene. Who cares? Some dice got tumbled, didn't mean anything. But there are other scenes I go through and I go, wow, okay, I learned something here about who my character is, what the world has to offer. And when those things happen, those are big deals. I think that's Soulstormer's got some great lines there. But that's what I'm looking for. If I could say what is the most important thing to me in gaming, it's those moments, where a character becomes something more than just a persona that I wrote down.
Sure.
When it lives in the moment, and that moment feels real in some way that it wasn't real a second before.
Yeah, and I think that, I think those things can happen. I don't know if I would say that a bulk of people create their character with that in mind. I think that as a GM, you can attempt to try to evoke that out of players and out of their characters.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to do.
It's a hard thing to do if the character isn't built with that concept in mind. If a character's development isn't built with that in mind, if the player doesn't have any interest in going to that level of emotion, you're not going to get there. So it's a really tough thing to do for those reasons.
Yeah, that's the big one.
And so it's a hard thing because, I mean, I don't know. I think you can get there, but you almost have to have a certain amount of player input.
Yes, you do. Yes, you absolutely do.
Ahead of time, so you can set that up so that it lands when you're ready for it to land. My NPC this last game session, they asked him why he was trying to do what he was doing, and Alexi said, I want to go back in time to fix my friend. Because he felt bad and responsible about what had happened. But that wasn't anything that I don't think, even though it's a very emotional moment for that character where he says something like that, it didn't land with the party as heavily because they're not that invested in him at that point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're thinking about how they're going to be involved in this whole thing, but you know, maybe if there's another character that has something like that going on or this, that, the other, maybe then it lands more with them. But that line, if I use that the next time I run horror in Huttenberg, might land because a particular character does have something like that it's involved in. So I write this plot and this storyline that has this potentially emotional moment in it. And even if I deliver it emotionally, it's not necessarily just going to land because of that. It has to have some connection back to the PCs in a way. You know, so I mean, it's just a matter of, do PCs then pick up on that and decide if they want to be more emotional, pick up on that, and then delve more into it. So you throw those little hooks out there for something like that, and it's just a matter of whether players bite on it or not, or else you just don't get it.
Yeah, and you said it before. It has a lot to do with who's in your group and what they're motivated by, what they care about, and what's going to cause them enjoyment or discomfort. And if you got a group of people that are made discomfortable by emotional scenes, you're not going to get emotional scenes because they're gonna close off, and those scenes are not going to develop in a way that's what's serious. And I think that's why I like smaller groups or small scenes that we got to run at LARPs, where yes, in a LARP, a live action role playing game, it's about large numbers of people. But I think the best things that ever happened in those were those small scenes between like two people, or like an NPC and a PC, you know, in isolation, and you got to see how that all unfolded, and like, and there was like a boundary that got dropped, and then suddenly there was like a revelation of some kind of emotional salience there.
Yeah,
and it doesn't happen very often in normal day-to-day role playing. But those are the moments I think that are like the most like perfect moments of gaming that I'm always looking for. I wish that I had more of them, but like they're just hard to find, you know.
Well, and the thing
good night,
is,
zombie toast.
Yeah, good night, zombie. I think the thing is that the rarity of it makes it more special when it does happen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a thing where, in my opinion, the system lends to that sometimes more than others. I think the World of Darkness and the way that system is set up lends to that style of storytelling.
Big time.
Way more than D&D does. Like, you have to artificially create it just through the storytelling roleplay aspect in D&D for it to come about. Whereas the elements in some of the World of Darkness games lend very heavily to that emotion. Wraith is hugely emotional.
Mm-hmm.
If you're playing Wraith, it's hard not to end up in an emotional spot with Wraith. You have to, by character creation, attach yourself to emotion. So it's really hard not to get away from that, you know, the concepts of the beast and things like that. So whereas in D&D, you have to take some of that kind of concept and apply it to your class or your ancestry or whatever to like interject that backstory wise into your character, where that's more important in those systems to have that for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make Dungeons and Dragons work for those sorts of things, but I don't think that it's designed, and it doesn't help you do those things.
Right. No, it does nothing to help you with it. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Whereas the World of Darkness gives you more tools to work with it. So
what's interesting about that is I don't think it's necessarily like the World of Darkness has a heavy focus on personality and emotion, but I don't think it's those things that are creating it so much as the lived experience, right? So like as a World of Darkness character, mortality is a reality. And Dungeons and Dragons, that's not the case. You know there's a res around the corner. You know you can get hit 500 times before you're going to drop down. You know it changes the way you interact with things. At least it does for me. Like, I don't take things seriously.
But is it really, Jeff? Is there always a resurrection around the corner, Jeff?
Fuck you.
just out of personal experience, would you say that's a true statement? I mean,
well, to be fair, technically, if Kodo were to want to, I think he's got Revivify. Actually, you've got Revivify. I know that.
Yeah.
So you could pick me up as Balrin, and I get what you're saying. Fuck you.
But just saying, I just was wondering out of personal experience if you feel like that's always true.
No, but I mean that's the reason why okay, so like this for those of you who may not know, in our most recent Everstorm 5e campaign, and spoilers. Plug your ears. Don't look at the screen.
Yes, look away, Air Laser. Avert your eyes.
My character Skeezer died, and there was a chance for. Obviously, there's hundreds of ways that I could probably get my character back if I were so inclined, but I don't want that. I don't like that. I don't like the idea of death being frivolous. And so, for me, the notion that I went into the scene knowing that there was a risk involved, that I was making choices along the way that could end up going bad, only mattered if, at the end of the day, it could go bad. Right. When it did, I want it to matter, which is why I'm actually kind of leaning towards not wanting to play this next game session, just because I want the rest of the group to be able to actually interact with the death without having to deal with injection of a new character. And I would have more fun watching that, I think, than bringing in a new character right away.
You think as a way of having the loss be felt, like your lack of your presence at the table to be felt for a game session would increase maybe the thing. That's not a bad idea. I hate that you wouldn't be there, but
I would be in the chat 100%.
Well, no, I mean in the game with us though. Like, I
think I would have more fun.
Would you just be hanging out in the Discord with us, just sitting there listening? Like,
sure.
So that you're on our screen, or would that kill it?
I'd be happy to do that too. I think that's the sort of thing I think will create a good scene for people. You know, like I think for players to be able to have an opportunity to digest what happened. You know, because like really at the end of the day, as a player, you can be like, oh, okay, character died. Oh no, Kenny's dead. You know, like let's move on. Who's the next guy?
And a new friend is here. Hey, friend.
Yeah. And think about how that interaction is going to go. Hey, new guy, you just showed up while we're having a really bad day. Oh, welcome to the team. Fuck you. You know, like, that's an awkward shoehorn moment.
That's true. That's definitely true. I hadn't even considered that. That's actually an excellent idea, as much as I'd hate for you to miss a game.
Oh, I 100% would love to sit in the Discord call on screen in the chat with you guys, just reacting to you guys reacting the whole night and not play a character. I think that would be fantastic. Because I think that, I don't know, for me, that's a way that I get to see how your characters behave in a post my character's death without going in there and adding something on top of it that's going to detract from it. Because I think there's a lot of things that need to be figured out. There's a readjustment that needs to occur with the group dynamic. There's realignment of plot. All that kind of stuff needs to happen. And I think injecting a new character immediately in that derails all that.
We need to reach something that looks like a civilization for him to be there. I mean, just that alone, like, I guess that's a fair statement too. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere. So, but no, I think that's an interesting concept. I had not considered you doing that. That is interesting.
So, yes, Levi, I know you're in the chat. You're talking right now. I want to do that this game session. So if you're cool with that, that's what I want to do. But VTech, that's exactly it. Yeah, not being there makes everyone feel it. Chris Drips, welcome. Thanks to you for popping in after your game session. I hope your session was good. You think VTech I should be on there as a black and white screen? Just silence? That's hilarious. Just be like a ghost just whispering in there. Quill DD. So you're saying there's a big show, or there are big shows that have done that, trying not to spoil, but it made when the new characters came in more meaningful. Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
I think I will enjoy being part of the team more after a pause away from it. And I think everyone else is going to have a better experience with that episode, because we ended up on a cliffhanger. There's at least one PC that doesn't know what's occurred, that will be reacting in the moment, and there are raw emotions on the table. And maybe it's just because I, as a player, find the emotional part of it really important, and I think it's a value add to the game, that I would like to see that. I mean, if the other players don't give a shit, if that's not something they want to do, then cool. But I think that would make a better game experience for everyone. Or selfishly, for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the thing about it. Like, if you're the Boromir of the story, you need for that turn for Boromir and his death to seem like it has longer lasting impact.
Yep.
So when you meet Faramir and you get to Rohan, his death then echoes through what happens in that second movie, in the second book. So you have to have that payoff in that, or otherwise, like, he was just that dickhead from the first movie who got killed by an orc.
Exactly.
So you got to have it matter. Like, so, I think it is important to have that. And I will say that immediately after that last Everstorm game, I did spend a certain amount of time thinking, like, what should Balrin do? As a PC who barely acknowledged that any of the Skeezers' names weren't all Skeezer, like, but then at the moment of Skeezer nearly, being destroyed, took a serious amount of action to try to stop that. At that moment, it failed. And what does that say to Balrin about the fact that it failed? And that even if his idea would have never technically worked, he doesn't know the difference. He went with it, and it didn't work. He could not save Skeezer. So, being the character who typically is thought of as being one who doesn't care, in that moment deciding to try. Yep, and then getting reinforced with the fact that failure comes to those who try. Yeah. Yeah, so then I have to decide, like, what would Balrin technically do from that point? So I think that's the kind of thing that maybe then we should make sure we see, like, in the next episode.
Yeah, well, if you want to hear the Skeezer voice.
Oh, since you highlighted Redeemed.
Yeah, feed me a line and I'll do it. Earlier, Quill Didi was asking a highlighted question. I don't know if we missed it there.
Did we?
Plots and stakes. How do you drive stakes for your plots? Deaths being some good stake.
I could talk on that one for a good half hour. Do we have a half hour? Okay.
Fuck it, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. I thought you were going to do Skeezer voice first.
I haven't got a line yet. Go ahead.
Okay. So, for stakes, I was talking to, if Radiator RPG still on here, if anyone out there, I'm about to spoil the shit out of Bitter Harvest, the story from the back of the Zweihander book, because this is...
Man, we're all spoilers at the end of this.
Yeah, we are. We're spoiling the shit out of things today. So Radiator won't care that much. Zweihander's been out there for a while. A lot of people... Bitter Harvest is out there. You can watch a lot of streams that show it. I do want to run it on stream sometime here. But I was talking with Chuck about the success I've had ramping up the stakes for Bitter Harvest when I've ran it off stream. Go ahead and do your Skeezer line, then we'll move on with this.
Oh yeah, hold on. I got ice in my mouth. Go ahead and keep talking for a second.
Okay, so I've ran the story adventure out of the back of the core book for Zweihander RPG. It's called A Bitter Harvest. It's a fantastic story. But I watched several other groups, the Notorious DMG, which was GM by Matt Jowett, who's going to be our guest next week, I think. And also I watched a run by Defenders of Cobalt, which DM Chuck ran. And as I watched their groups and one other group that I saw run it on a stream, I realized that the answer was always the same. The conclusion was relatively the same. Do I want to just full spoil it or not? Okay, so there is the main villain of the story technically is super, super sympathetic. You learn a lot about this person before you meet them, and by the time you meet them and the group that this person is with, it's very easy for you to decide to side with this person because of what has happened to that person in their backstory. So the hard part is that the people who technically are the protagonist in the story, or less antagonistic perhaps, are complete slimy sleazeball characters. So every time that I see a group encounter where, in my opinion, the morality decision comes in Bitter Harvest, they make the easy choice and join the technical villain to roll back into the town and take care of the sleazeballs. So I said to myself, how can I create higher stakes for the end of this story? And after watching a few other groups basically kind of come away with the same ending, I said to myself, I felt like the element that was missing is just how savagely brutal that group is that the end guy is technically with, and just how fragile a lot of the other people in the town who are not those main character slime balls are, and what that group is going to do to that group if you side with them. Mm-hmm. So then every time I put a group in that point where they have to make a decision, the 3 times I've ran it, all 3 times, half of the group has sided with the sympathetic NPC, probably for very personal player reasons, in my opinion. And the other half says, but they're going to do the same horrible things that happened to that NPC again if we side with them, and has gone back to try to warn the scum slimy NPCs about their coming, and it's split the party to the point that the party's turned on themselves on every single time I've ran it after making that small adjustment. So to me, it's about balancing the stakes, because if one path is the path of least resistance and seems to have the most feel-good ending, players will gravitate to that easily. So for me, it's about balancing. If you want to increase stakes, you have to balance it's about balancing both sides of the argument to the point that there's not a clear yes answer.
Yeah.
And that's where it really gets tough. So without spoiling too much, that's how I have managed to up the stakes on that particular story. Now, every other story, you may have to do different things, but that was just for that one. Without spoiling exactly what happens, that's what I've had to do to create this dynamic where PC parties literally have murdered other PCs in that moment to try to do what they thought was right based on the story that leads up to it. So,
well, yeah, I mean, it goes back to like what you're saying there. It has to go back to the sides being reasonable. Like we've talked about this with bad guys, like bad guys don't brush their teeth evil is one of the things we've said.
Right. That's a DM Chuck quote right there.
It is. And the idea is that with few exceptions, villains don't view themselves as villains. And I think that's important. And I think that's the case with stories. If you have a clearly, this is the bad thing to do, it becomes a non-real choice, like you were describing. It becomes like I want to be edgy bad guy, so I'll pick 2. Like...
Here's where I think the difference is. You say that bad guys have to think they're not the bad guy, and that is 110% correct. Mm-hmm. What I do to raise the stakes is I try to go one step further. This is the difference, in my opinion, between like a Thanos and a Magneto. Mm-hmm. Thanos believes he's right.
Yeah.
And when you see his story told in Infinity War, the way it's told there, more so than the comic, you kind of are like, I see where Thanos is going with this, but he's still wrong. Mm-hmm. You get somebody like Magneto, super sympathetic character because of what he went through in his backstory. There's times between him and Xavier you're like, I'm not sure Magneto's not wrong. I think Magneto might actually be the correct choice in this situation. And that, to me, is what I have to strive for in Horror and Huttenberg. I need a situation where my NPCs, some of them that might be the big bad end guys, you have to make the decision of, is this guy right? Mm-hmm. And that's harder than the NPC himself thinking he's right. Yes, the NPC needs to think he's right, but you have to turn the corner and get the PCs to think maybe he's right. And that's a hard thing to do. Yeah,
I mean, because that's different than derangement, right? So like somebody could be delusional in thinking that their evil is not evil, but having an actual motivation that is legitimate enough that an outside observer looks at it and goes, wow, you know what? Maybe that's something, right? And I think that's some of what I'm planning to see how it plays out. It may completely not happen at all, but
sure.
With my game, I'm looking to see an exploration of power, ambition, and where that lands people. And with the way PCs typically play, I have a feeling people are going to be like, you know what? I'm just going to control shit. I'm going to be strong. I'm going to take advantage of situations. I'm going to use whatever power I can get. And there's a reflection that's possible there that I think will be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how you lay it out and if any of the PCs bite on it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, VTech. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want the scene where the PCs go, am I the good guy?
Yeah, see, I think my problem, I think maybe where I run into problems with that is that my characters go in pretty much just knowing I'm not a good guy.
Yeah. Well,
like,
I think that's true for a lot of people.
I've already turned that corner to a degree. Like, my question is, man, am I really going to end up being a good guy? Like, am I going to overcome? Am I going to, like, is Bowron actually going to start giving a shit? Like,
well, and I think that's the interesting thing, though, is a conscious exploration of morality, right? Like,
yeah.
I'm a character who doesn't give a shit, and yet I'm in a situation where suddenly I feel something for some reason. Why? I thought I was getting an advantage out of this, and that's why I was motivated by it, but it turns out there's actually a different motivation here, and it's not what I would have expected. That's what's fucking interesting.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we like to do around here, Quella Deity, is make people question their life decisions.
Just rewrite your whole story. Okay, so I did have a line earlier I gotta say in Skeezerdom, so let's go back up
go
there.
ahead and get your line in now.
Yeah. I just wish I had more time.
That's the line.
Very well done there, Jim.
Yeah.
Very well done.
In actuality, his final words were,
So, think like a door. Got it.
Which, not nearly as cool as the previous line that he spoke.
Fucking hell, man.
But Jeff had to go and talk again.
I did. I fucked it up.
He messed it up. He had the best last line ever and then followed it up with that line, and that was unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, we do have a lot of people falling asleep on us here, and it is 20 minutes after our usual stop time. So do we want to wrap it up here, or what are we thinking?
Oh, I did have one other thing I was going to say about stakes real fast, and then
stakes.
The outros. I was going to say what I did with Terran Treefell. If you watch that run again, and I've mentioned this before, when I wanted to ramp up stakes in Terran Treefell, I made sure that my villain was sympathetic and that you could maybe want to side with him. Maybe he wasn't really a villain, but that's kind of how it was playing out. And then when the players didn't immediately jump for that, the consequences got a little worse. And then when they didn't jump at it again, the consequences got a little worse. And because the goal was to see if they would sacrifice the little girl or not, I had to keep ramping up those stakes till they had to either basically, shit or get off the pot. And then they didn't. And so then they dealt with a very, very nasty creature because of it. And it made the party have to kill half of the other party. Half the party abandoned the other half the party.
Yeah, that's a wacky ending.
Due to a series of critical fails, which in Zweihander can make things go very awry very quickly. We got one hell of a last episode of Terran Treefell because of it.
Yeah,
and that set the stage for what is now happening in Horror and Huttenberg in ways that I'm not even positive Jeff, who edited all the Terran Treefell videos, has fully even aware of everything that has happened, how it translates into what's going on with his character right now. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on there that, but a lot of that came about because the party didn't take my initial bait, and I just had to keep ramping up the stakes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good stuff. So we got a lot of things cooking coming forward. Hopefully some of these stories are going to get resolved in ways that are going to be rather interesting. We do have Everstorm this Saturday, so come check us out then. So we'll be seeing that scene of the players reconciling with the fact that they've lost a party member. And we got a lot to do on that one. We've got all kinds of shows this week, so make sure you are there. and we'll see what we're up to. Tomorrow is Cam's show, Bardic Knowledge. I'm not sure what he's going to be doing. He may be doing music. He may be doing his video game stuff. We'll find out. But that is 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. And the Wednesday, still on the fence whether I'm going to be running game. I'll check in with you. Make sure you check on the Discord and see where we are on there. We'll give you updates as we kind of go. Thursday is video game nights. We play all kinds of crazy stuff on there. Friday, I think I'm playing Monster of the Week with Air Laser, but I'm not positive on that. So check that out on her channel, Air Laser. And Saturday is the Everstorm, like we talked about. Sunday is an off week for Zweihander.
That's right. Yeah, we're off this coming week. Everstorm and Zweihander are now on opposite weeks for a little while. So this is an Everstorm weekend, and then Horror and Huttenberg will be the following week. Where we will be Chapter 5, which I have not yet titled, but it'll be coming out soon.
It's usually a good thing to have a tricky time titling things. And then next week here on Monday is the 17th, so that is the Matt Jowett reunion?
I believe so. I probably will contact him to reassure all that, to confirm that he'll be here. But yes, I do believe Matt Jowett will be here with us. He's one of the GMs over at Grim and Perilous Plays and Zweihander RPG. Like I said, member of the notorious DMG, who with me and Chuck and Boffer and many of the others that we do our thing, and then he picked up my Zweihander, so he's been doing a lot of work for them. He was also our very first guest on the Wisdom Check, so he's coming full circle by having him come back on the show. So super excited to talk to him about all the process that he went through with a lot of that stuff, and what he's doing today, and how he's gone. When he was here, it was Jowsum's Den. Like I said, everything's a lot's changed since then, so we'll have a lot of catching up with Matt to do. So
absolutely. And thank you, audience, for coming along with us, asking really good questions, giving us good conversations to go through. VTech, thank you. As always, Wisdom Check was successfully passed, he says, so thank you. We try. Sometimes we spout nonsense, other times critical successes. We appreciate you guys being along for the ride. So if you guys have missed anything, YouTube has all of our backlog on it. And I am moderately caught up at this point with videos. I do have some stuff to put on there. Like I need to put all the new Zweihander stuff up there. And I've got one more episode of Pathfinder put up. And then we got to get some of the other Everstorm stuff up there. But otherwise, most things are on there. And it looks like we are loading up for a raid. Where are we going, Dustin?
We're heading over to Quest and Chaos. So stay tuned. We'll see you all later this week. Take care. Get in the Discord. Keep up. If Jeff doesn't run Pathfinder Wednesday, I might do an impromptu GM prep for Zweihander.
Oh, fantastic. That'll be
great. If Jeff's not feeling quite up to it, I got your back on Wednesday. So we'll make it happen.
Sounds good, man.
Here's a raid. Let's go.
Adios.